Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. My name is Joyce Duriga. I'm editor of the Chicago Catholic, and this is where we go beyond the headlines to take a closer look at the news we're covering in the Chicago Catholic each week. Today our special guest is Michelle Martin. She's a longtime staff writer for the Chicago Catholic, and we're talking about our special issue that's coming out in the parish this weekend that's celebrating Cardinal Cupich's 10th anniversary as Archbishop of Chicago. So welcome, Michelle. Thanks for doing this.
Hi, Joyce. How are you today?
Well, thank you. All right, go ahead. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us the background about Cardinal Cupich.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, Cardinal Cupich was born and raised in Omaha. He is one of 9 children in his family. He was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Omaha. He served as pastor of 2 parishes there. But also as a priest, he served as secretary to the Apostolic Nuncio in Washington, D.C.
Tell people what that is. I don't think people know what that is.
The Apostolic Nuncio is essentially the Vatican's ambassador to the United States. It would be the diplomatic representative of the Vatican in the United States, except that instead of dealing with the U.S. government, the Apostolic Nuncio deals a great deal with the Church in the United States.
Okay.
Cardinal Cupich also served as rector-president of a seminary in Columbus, Ohio. When he was first named a bishop, he was Bishop of Rapid City, South Dakota, and then after several years, he was named Bishop of Spokane, Washington. That is where he was serving when he was named Archbishop of Chicago, and that appointment was announced on September 20th, 2014, and he became the first Archbishop to replace a surviving Archbishop of Chicago,
which was Cardinal Francis George. It was busy times going on in the Archdiocese, that's for sure. We remember covering it all. And folks who were watching this online or listening to it, there'll be more photos and stuff online at ChicagoCatholic.com and then in the paper that chronicles his journey through Chicago. So when he came, we had Cardinal Cupich, but we had Cardinal George. And then Cardinal Cupich was Archbishop of Chicago, and then he became Cardinal.
Yes. Generally speaking, if there is a see that has a cardinal and a new archbishop is named, that new archbishop, first of all, is not guaranteed to become a cardinal at all. That's completely at the Pope's prerogative. But almost never would they become a cardinal while there is a living cardinal in that see. So Cardinal George passed in 2015, and Cardinal Cupich was made a cardinal in November of 2016, so almost a year and a half after Cardinal George passed.
And I was there we happened to be going on a pilgrimage at the same time, and then for the closing of the Jubilee Year of Mercy, and then Cardinal Cupich was...
Yes, that consistory was right at the end of the Jubilee Year.
Yeah, it was neat. So one of the big things he did when he first came was institute, get off the ground, Renew My Church.
Yes, he announced Renew My Church in the spring of 2016, so it was before he became a cardinal. He'd only been here for about a year and a half at that point, and he announced it by really recalling St. Francis and the call St. Francis heard from God to rebuild my church. And I'm sure we've all heard the story about how St. Francis took that literally and rebuilt the church, the building. And it wasn't until after he had done that he understood that the call was to rebuild the church, the body of Christ. And Cardinal Cupich is seeing Renew My Church as a call to rebuild the Church of Chicago, to create vital parish communities that build the faith life and create bonds of fellowship among Catholics in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and support them in becoming missionary disciples so that they can share the good news with everybody.
And it involved merging and closing of a lot of parishes.
It did, and much like St. Francis started by rebuilding the physical church structure, the Archdiocese had to start by creating a structure that could have vibrant, flourishing parishes where each parish could have the resources it needed to provide that support to its parishioners. That support is financial, certainly, but it's also personnel, just having enough priests to be pastor to the parishes, and personnel in terms of lay people also, because we're it really leans into lay collaboration with the pastors.
And you said in the story about the number of parishes, we had 350 parishes in 2016, and as of November 24, there are 216 parishes. And yeah, we're on a new phase.
And right now we're working towards the phase of helping parishes develop missionary disciples. Helping people understand their own faith so that they're comfortable going out and sharing that faith.
It's been a long, interesting, not always easy process.
It's never easy, especially when the process includes closing parishes.
Yeah. So obviously Cardinal Cupich has been involved in a lot of things at the Vatican. So one of the first things was the International Summit on Abuse. Can you tell people about that?
Well, first, Cardinal Cupich, when he was a bishop, even before he came to Chicago, was active in the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' efforts in handling clerical sexual abuse and responding to it. So that it makes sense that he was a good choice to be one of 4 people who were on the organizing committee for the Vatican Summit on Abuse. The Vatican Summit on Abuse took place over 4 days in 2019, and the Pope and 190 church leaders listened to victim survivors of clerical sexual abuse and came up with steps going forward. They changed canon law. They put in some steps to try to hold bishops accountable. It really did make some significant change.
And do you think we've seen some of that play out, or do we have to wait a little longer? And every country's different, so it's kind of a challenge.
Right, and that's one of the difficulties. I think we here in the Archdiocese of Chicago have been dealing and responding to clerical sexual abuse longer than certainly many dioceses around the world, but even many dioceses around the country. We came up with policies in the early 1990s when Cardinal Bernardine was here. And we did have to adjust those policies in 2002 when the scandal started in Boston. But we do have, I think, a little more experience than many dioceses in handling it, certainly around the world, because there have been places around the world that see clerical sexual abuse as an American problem or a Western problem, and it's clear that it's not.
Well, I forget the year of so you mentioned Boston, so I forgot the year that the USCCB had that big meeting where they implemented the standards across the board that every
2002.
That's 2002. Yeah, so we've been, I think that's a story that people forget all the time, that we have a robust prevention program. Kids are taught in the classrooms, volunteers go through background checks, they go through training on abuse and how to detect abuse, not how to perpetuate abuse. So I do think it's one of the good untold, we tell it a lot, but I don't think we can, stop telling it.
I think it's a story that we have to keep telling. I know that having my children in Catholic schools, I've been heartened when I'll go in and I'll see signs posted on, in the teacher lounge reminding people of steps to take to keep kids safe. So, I do think that it's effective. I know that I've heard from my kids what they've learned in school, and it's important, but it's a story that we need to keep telling.
And so we won't forget. Okay, so he's also been active on the national level. So there was a big talk in 2023 at Fordham University. And I know you did our story for that, if you want to talk about that. It's a lot of heady stuff, so it's...
Well, he was really expanding on the talk that Cardinal Bernardine gave at Fordham University 40 years earlier, which was where Cardinal Bernardine proposed his consistent ethic of life, which said that if we are going to be pro-life, yes, we absolutely need to advocate for the unborn, but we also need to advocate for people on the margins of society, people who are poor, people who are sick, for the elderly. And Cardinal Cupich expanded on that in a time by 2023, we as a country and we as a church were already mired in a great deal of division. And I think he was using the consistent ethic of life that Cardinal Bernardine proposed, in saying that the way to get to that is solidarity. And that solidarity is what we need to overcome the division that we've been living with.
It's probably even more so important now.
I would say so.
Yeah, indeed. How do we get to that solidarity? Did he say, do you remember?
I think it's a matter of recognizing the humanity of all of the people around us. Recognizing that, everybody, it goes back to the most basic of Catholic social teaching, that we are all created in the image of and likeness of God. And that includes people that we don't like and people that we don't agree with, but we all have that innate human dignity, and we need to treat everybody as though they have that dignity.
Now, on the local archdiocesan level, gun violence is never out of the news. We're filming this today on Election Day, which is also, last night, a Chicago police officer was shot and killed. So Cupich has spoken on this and acted on this over the course of his time here. One of the things that I always remember is that walk in Inglewood on Good Friday.
And that was, relatively early in his time here. I think it was 2017.
Yeah. And
hundreds of people came out. And I think that was the advantage, I guess, of having the Cardinal come out, because you're aware, I don't know how many of our listeners and viewers are aware, that parishes do peace walks frequently.
Yes.
St. Sabina does them every Friday night during the summer. But other parishes do them as well, and they often don't generate much, if any, news coverage. But when Cardinal Cupich did it in Englewood in 2017, it was covered everywhere. And
Jesse Jackson, I was just looking at the photos to compile this issue. Jesse Jackson was there, yeah.
So hundreds of people came out, hundreds of leaders, community members, police, firefighters. And what they did was did Stations of the Cross outdoors. But before each station, they would read the names of people who had been shot and killed in Chicago just that year, from January 1st to mid-April 2017, and prayed for them. And it did bring a lot of attention to it. Obviously, it has not ended gun violence in Chicago. He's also spoken out about gun violence around the country. Later that year, he spoke after the shooting in the Baptist church in, I think it was Sutherland Springs, Texas, and he has advocated for stronger regulations against high-powered weapons that can kill a lot of people very quickly. The kind of weapons that we saw used in Highland Park just a few years ago.
Right, that was, yes. We did a lot of coverage on that. Because I don't know you know this, but for the listening and the viewers, we have a parish that was just down the street, and we're in the parade.
Mm-hmm. It was a parish that had just been united through the Renew My Church process.
Pastor was there just like 2 days.
And they were introducing their new parish to the community in Highland Park by being in the parade with the float and with people marching. So, they were there, they were waiting to start their progress down the parade route, and then the shots rang out, and they ended up taking shelter in the church, which was only 3 blocks away, with, I want to say, 20 people, maybe a few more.
Rosary.
Praying the rosary all afternoon.
And then they did services after that. They did,
starting that night.
That's one of the things I love about, many things I love about the Catholic community in Chicago, but we're very active on these, and not every parish, but like you said, I covered a couple weeks ago a peace walk in South Chicago, and there are peace walks everywhere. The school, St. Benedict the African in Inglewood, does one pretty
every year,
and other parishes too, and traditionally quote unquote non-violent communities that don't see a ton of violence. Okay, so let's talk about immigrants and immigration reform. Obviously, that's been a hot topic for years and hasn't gone away.
We at Chicago Catholic have been covering Catholic advocacy for immigration reform since the early 2000s. There was a moment in around about 2005, when there was a lot of hope that we would get a comprehensive immigration reform package, and we would get immigration reform that made sense for the country and for the immigrants who are here. And that obviously did not happen. And we have kept working on it, working on ways to support the dreamers, the young people who were brought here without documents when they were children, to support people who have lived here for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years, whether they have documents or not.
Right.
We're still working on it. And it was one of the things that Cardinal Cupich brought up in the press conference he had when he was first introduced. It's something that he has continued to advocate for. The story has changed a little over the last 3 years. We've had, I think the city of Chicago is saying we've received over 50,000 migrants since the summer of 2022. It started when they were being bused here, mostly from Texas. And in some ways it seemed like a political stunt because the Texas governor was busing migrants to cities that were led by Democrats.
In sanctuary cities.
In sanctuary cities, because he said that they should not be left alone to handle all of the migrants coming across. And Chicago did their best to welcome people, even though a lot of them didn't know exactly where they were coming. They were told things about Chicago that weren't true before they got here.
You mean you're talking about like the great dream that they would?
Yes.
Yeah, and yeah.
So it seems like the political nature of it has kind of died down, and now it's just become an effort to welcome and accommodate people, to help people find more permanent housing, to help people figure out if they can get documents so that they can work. And Catholic Charities has been greatly involved in that. They've been very involved in the finding housing for people. We have a lot of parishes who have sponsored 1, 2, 3 more families. We have other parishes who have worked very hard to provide whatever kind of emergency assistance that the migrants have needed. So it's become not just a push for immigration reform for people who are already here, but suddenly a need to welcome the stranger who is arriving generally with the clothes on their backs and nothing else.
And he announced a big collection that then Catholic Charities used to disperse to the parishes. About that, do you remember?
I don't remember exactly how much.
I think I did that story actually.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember how much was collected.
That question.
But I do know that some parishes, like in Oak Park, the parishes of Oak Park have been hugely supportive.
They've been amazing, yeah. And they turned their convent into first a homeless shelter, overnight homeless shelter, and then services for migrants.
And at the same time, parishes in Chicago have also done a lot of work trying to welcome migrants and make them feel comfortable.
We've covered a ton. When some people ask, I will actually occasionally get asked, what can we do to help? I'm like, read the Chicago Catholic, because we'll tell you who's doing what, and they all need help.
Right.
And even down to the little kid we covered, not little, he was 10, 11, very young kid, who organized a toy. He went through all his toys, and the parish was holding things on the weekends, meals, but then coats, school supplies, and then he manned a table with all his toys, and he's giving out his toys. Well,
it's something that we have seen time and again from the Catholic community in Chicago. I mean, after the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, there were a lot of Puerto Ricans who came to Chicago because they had family here, but they were coming with, maybe they had a little more than the clothes on their backs, but not much. And the Catholic community then reached out and collected clothing, money, toys.
What's funny is that this kid and his family came here from that, because they lost everything in the hurricane. And I think that was part of their motivation too. One, their family has a spirit of service, and, but the other was, they were given so much that they wanted to help on that level too. Yeah, it's very interesting, very rich what people are doing. Not rich monetarily, meaning rich. There's a lot of things that Catholics have done to reach out. I remember even during the pandemic, like things shut down, Catholics went out. Mm-hmm. So I get emotional. All right, let's go back to the national level. Catholic-Muslim dialogue. That started in 2016 when he was named the Catholic co-chair of the National Catholic-Muslim Dialogue.
Right, and it was a new Catholic-Muslim dialogue. We've had several Catholic-Muslim dialogues over the past several decades, and this was a new one. He was named the Catholic co-chair. There's also a Muslim co-chair. And as part of this, there were conferences at CTU in 2017 and in 2019. And then an online conference in 2021 because we were during COVID. And a lot of those conferences were finding ways that Catholics and Muslims could work together and reach out to each other in friendship. And then after 2019, they were building off the efforts that Pope Francis made in his trips to the Arab world.
And there was a couple historic things that Pope Francis did.
Right. He signed an agreement of friendship in 2019 with a leader of the Sunni community. And most Muslims in the U.S. are Sunni Muslims, so that had a lot of weight here with the Muslim community. But it basically is using Pope Francis as an example of how we as Catholics can reach out a hand in friendship to our Muslim neighbors.
So this just wrapped up. He was a member of the Synod on Synodality in Rome. That was a long process. We laugh because we cover it, and it started out with unpacking what synodality means, and then there were listening sessions and reports compiled, and
right there was a long kind of I don't know that ramp up is the right term, but there was a period of time before the Synod of Bishops met in Rome, which was originally announced to be in October 2023. So I think starting in 2021, dioceses around the world were invited to start holding listening sessions to discuss synodality and what it means in the church. And synod and synodality means walking together. It means journeying together. And the idea of synodality is that we are all pilgrims, we are all journeying together. So in these synod listening sessions that were local, the idea was to listen to people in the Catholic community, people not in the Catholic community, but to sit with the Holy Spirit and listen to what we understood we as a church are and should be, and how we walk on that journey together. So that has been going on for a very long time. Pope Francis named Cardinal Cupich as a delegate to the Synod of Bishops in October 23. I think just the July before that. He also named a lot of people as full members of the Synod, which hadn't been done before. Lay people, women religious, priests, some young adults coming from all over the world. So it's been a much more diverse Synod than we've usually had. And in the Synod meetings, and the Synod was then expanded, it was October of 2023 and October of 2024. Synod groups would sit and listen to one another. And I haven't seen a lot of full debriefs from this year's session, but after the October 2023 session, one of the things that a lot of people said was in these synod groups, you would have bishops and archbishops and, young adults who are pastoral associates at a parish somewhere, and priests and religious sisters. And when it was the young adults' turn to talk, the bishop had to listen. And some of the bishops weren't used to that.
Right.
So it's been an interesting process. And I don't know that we will see, we're not going to see huge changes immediately coming out from it. The idea is to change the way we are church together.
And then now it's moving on to applying that to the local churches.
Right. So it kind of flows up, and then then it kind of flows back.
So it'll be interesting to see how that works. It's been a fast 10 years.
It has been. I was sort of surprised when we saw that he had been here for 10 years already. The one thing that we haven't really talked about is dealing with the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was a challenge for everybody, all institutions, all churches, Catholic and not. And it was certainly a challenge for us, but we got through it.
Amen. All right, folks, that's if you want to read more about Cardinal Cupich's 10th anniversary, go to ChicagoCatholic.com. You can subscribe to us there. We're $35 a year. That helps support our ministry. You can sign up for social media. We have a free e-newsletter that we send out a couple times a week. And you can find out everything that Cardinal Cupich is up to, and Pope Francis. Well, maybe not everything that they're up to, but what we cover. So, and as always, thank you for supporting our ministry. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.